Is buy-to-let worth it in 2021? This is a big question I'm asked all the time. And my answer is, well, it really depends on you and what you're trying to achieve from your property investing and where you are in your property journey. It's going to be very different from if you're just getting into property. So, well, is it still worth doing? Or maybe you've been in property for a number of years saying, well, is it still worth staying in? Should I get out? So this video is going to answer that question for you no matter where you are in your property journey. So my name is Simon Zutshi. I've been investing in property since 1995. And by the way, I would say if you're doing it in the right way, yes, property investing is still worth it, but you've got to do it in the correct way. Now, I'm also the author of Property Magic, the Amazon property #1 bestseller, and I'm the founder of the Property Investors Network, which is the very first and largest network of property investors all around the UK with 50 meetings every month. And this is the question that often comes up. Now, why do people ask this question? Partly because there's a lot of legislation coming in to be a property investor, and also we've changed the way that we are taxed as property investors. All of this is having an impact on us, and thus the question, is it still work? Does buy-to-let still work in 2021? Now, I think to answer that, we need to look at different types of buy-to-let. Buy-to-let is a very general term, so let's break it down a bit. When I think about buy-to-let property, I think about specifically single-let properties. However, a lot of people think about buy-to-let. For them, that means where you have a property, you rent out, you don't live there. That's a buy-to-let property, whereas your residential property is where you live. But in that buy-to-let category, as I said, there's single-let properties, and there's also HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. Now, HMOs are generally seen as a more advanced strategy, renting out to one contract to one person or a couple or a family is less work perceived than an HMO where you might have 5 tenants in the property all on their own contract, but an HMO makes a lot more money. It also depends how you structure your property investing. Now, historically, when I started investing in property in 1995, I really didn't know what I was doing. I bought my second property in 98 and held on to my first one, and I started to learn a bit more about how to be an investor. And what I learned early on was historically, it was always best if you owned property in your own name. Let me say that again. Historically, it was best to own property in your own name. And that was for all sorts of reasons, mainly tax reasons. However, in April 2017, we saw the introduction of Section 24. Now, this is a change to the way that we are taxed as property investors. The government said, well, you can't offset the interest on your mortgage against your rental income to reduce the profits. So they say, we're going to tax you on that now. So the problem here is that a property that might not actually make money, maybe someone didn't really know what they're doing, they bought a property that didn't give them cash flow, on paper, calculated the new way, it's going to make a profit, and thus they're going to have to pay some money to the tax man. So this property is not putting money into their pocket, it's not making a profit for them, and yet they still got to pay tax on it. For those people, I'd say, well, is buy-to-let really worth it? Probably not. This is why we're seeing so many landlords, traditional landlords who might have a big portfolio, or maybe someone who's an accidental landlord, just 1 or 2 properties, saying, you know what, I don't think it is worth it anymore, and they're starting to sell their properties. So what does it mean if you're just coming into the market, or if you're in a stage where you don't want to leave, but you actually want to build your portfolio? Well, actually, I think this is a great opportunity. So if you know what you're doing, if you're educated and always do your due diligence, then actually 2021 could be a great time to be doing buy-to-let property. And by that, I'm looking at the general term single lets and also HMOs. Now, I can't give you any tax advice, and it's important you get your own individual tax advice based on your personal circumstances. However, what many investors are doing, those who are coming new to the market, and even those who've been in property for a while, they're starting to buy their properties within a company structure. Now, the reason they're doing that is because if it's owned in a company, it's not affected by Section 24. So you might have a landlord who's selling a property and, based on the rental income coming in, because they're affected by Section 24, they're not really making any money. By the way, if you are a higher rate taxpayer and you've got mortgages on the property and the property is in your own name, that's when you're affected by Section 24. If you own property in your own name, but you don't have mortgages, or if you're not a high rate taxpayer, you may not be affected. Having said that, many landlords, they do own in their own name, they do have mortgages, and because they're making lots of money from their property, they are higher rate taxpayers. So there are lots and lots of people who are affected by this Section 24. For some of those people, it may not be worth it. So you can have someone who's selling a property that doesn't really work for them, someone completely new can come in, can buy that property in a company structure, and because they're not affected by Section 24, that property makes money for them, whereas it doesn't make money for the existing landlord. So it really does depend on the structure in which you're buying as to, is it really worth buy-to-let property, still doing it in 2021 or not? The other thing is, if you're buying HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, then obviously you've got a much higher cash flow, and even though you're paying more tax, you're making a lot more money than a single let property, and it still might be worth doing. There are also a number of strategies you can do which are still buy to let, where you're renting your property out, but actually they're not affected by Section 24. So these are, for example, rent to rent. So you find someone who's got a property they're struggling to rent out, maybe they're a distant remote landlord, you're local so you can really focus on getting that property full, you give a guaranteed rent to the owner, and then you rent the property out for more and you make a margin between what you earn and what you pay the landlord. That's called rent to rent. Now you are not affected by Section 24. The owner is, but you are not affected by that. Also, you could do a purchase lease option, which is one step better than rent to rent, because as well as getting that monthly cash flow, you've got the right to buy that property in the future if you want to do that. And again, the rental income coming in when it's a PLO is not affected by Section 24. So there are strategies you can use that doesn't matter what structure you own or control that property in. And then also there's serviced accommodation, otherwise known as furnished holiday lets, which again at the moment is not affected by Section 24. So doing that strategy in your own name, Section 24 is not a problem. And serviced accommodation and furnished holiday lets can give you a very, very good high profit because you rent the property out very short term, but for much higher rent. Now, obviously, service accommodation was hit massively during 2020 and into 2021 a little bit when we had the effect of COVID and the lockdowns when you couldn't operate those. Many of my students, what they did, they took their holiday homes and they converted them into isolation units. So people who may be frontline workers, they had to be very close to their work. They didn't want to go back and live at home with their families because they didn't want to potentially give them the virus. Especially if they had vulnerable family members living at home. So they were living close to their work in these isolation units. And that's how many of my students were able to fill properties that would normally be filled by holidaymakers and still make a good profit whilst providing much needed accommodation. And that's why it's really important that if you're looking to invest in 2021 or 2022, it's important to make sure you keep up to date with what's happening in the market and you adapt your strategy. I sometimes meet people who've been investing for 10 years, since maybe 2010, and they've just been investing in a rising market. And anyone can make money in a rising market. And maybe they've had just one strategy that's worked really, really well for them. And they've been investing 10 years, think, yep, I know all about property. But you know what? The market could change. Many people believe we're going to see a dip in property prices towards the end of 2021. I thought it was going to happen in 2020 because furlough was supposed to end in October 2020. The government extended that, and so I think it's going to be end of 2021 or maybe even 2022. But when the market dips, the strategies people have been using for the last 10 years may not be so relevant moving forward. So for example, when you buy a house and do it up to sell it on, it's called flipping property. That's not such a good strategy if the market's coming down. So it's really important to keep up to date with what's happening in the market to make sure you're learning from other successful people who are out there doing it as well, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So to answer the question, is buy-to-let worth it in 2021? I believe yes, it is, if you do it in the correct way. For some people who've been doing property a long time, it's not worth it anymore and they're selling up and retiring, which are great properties for us to pick up from those landlords. So if you've liked this video, I'd encourage you to please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, want to come and subscribe to the channel. click the bell icon and you'll get notified every time we bring a new video out. Sometimes there's a bit of overlap, sometimes they're about market and conditions, sometimes they're very specific property strategies, but I encourage you to go and check these videos out yourself because there's lots of free training here. So if you liked it, as I said, come and like it, come and subscribe, put a comment in the comment box and I'll come and answer as many comments as I possibly can. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I do hope you've enjoyed watching this video. And look, if you want to learn more about houses of multiple occupation and how you can really profit using them, I've got some extra online training that I'd like to give you access to. So all you have to do is click in the link in the description below the video and you can come and register and get access to that training, which will give you far more detail and really help you save a lot of time and make some real shortcuts to make sure you're getting the next HMO property much, much quicker. So click on the link right now and come and register for that extra bonus training with me. In the meantime, I've also lined up another video here I think you'll find really useful. So until the next video, remember to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.